Today, the Supreme Court considers a case centered around an evangelical Christian mail carrier's refusal to work Sundays for the U.S. Postal Service. The case could give the court a chance to widen religious rights, but has also led to a debate over whether religious people are more deserving than others to taking weekend days off, for instance.
Tough discussion here, but joining us to make it clearer, content creator at Kendall in Kentucky, that's Kendall Bailey, plus distinguished professor at Truro University, Thane Rosenbaum. I'm going to start with you, Kendall. Your thoughts on this one, because for me, I can see it either way. Listen, if that is your day of worship, you shouldn't have to work that day, especially if when you originally signed up for that job, you didn't have to work on Sundays. But part of me also says, well, you know what? If the job description changes and you want to keep your job, you have to evolve.
Well, in case you missed it, we are in a spiritual battle right now. We have roughly 2.4 billion people who practice Christianity. And this individual took this job because the post isn't delivered on Sundays, just like someone would take a job at Hobby Lobby or at Chick-fil-A. And he was hired under that pretense. Now that they're changing that, I think that they need to accommodate him, just like they accommodate the 1% of transgenders. We are bending over backwards for the LGBTQVZ cactus community, and yet we can't do anything for Christians. And my question would be, why can't the government do something for Christians? Why can't they accommodate one day off for this gentleman?
Yeah. Well, Thane, I guess the question then is, if you do it for a Christian, do you have to do it for a Muslim and then for somebody who is of the Jewish faith? So it could go beyond Christianity. And from what I understand, it also, for the employer, is you have to respect somebody's religious beliefs as long as it doesn't cause an undue hardship. Is that right?
Yes, Bob. In fact, that's really what this case was about all day. What the question is, what does undue hardship mean? Up until now, the idea was that if there was even any minimal inconvenience to the employer, de minimis hardship, that would mean that they no longer had to provide a religious accommodation to a religious employee who wanted to observe the Sabbath or whatever their religious affiliation is. So the question really comes down to, what is the undue hardship? In the case of the postal employees, the Postal Service said, hey, we're going to go out of business. If it's not for Amazon, we're out of business. And so we need to deliver on Sundays. And if we don't rely on religious people to give up their Sundays, we have to force other people to work double shifts. So really, it really came down to, remember, this is a Supreme Court that's very sympathetic to religious liberty. So we saw that last year with the football coach who wanted to pray on the 50-yard line, or the Catholic adoption agency that didn't want to be required to adopt to same-sex couples. So I would not be surprised at the end of this term that we get a favorable result here for the postal worker. But again, this issue really comes down to something much simpler. What constitutes an undue hardship?
In Kendall, as Thane mentioned, the current Supreme Court does have that track record of expanding religious rights. But on the other hand, the left-wing Postal Workers Union actually came out against its own member in this case. Explain that.
I think it's similar to the school situation. And if there is a Christian school teacher, the school board doesn't want to go for them. They want to go for the LGBTQ community. And we are constantly getting backlash. And again, as Christians, we just aren't supported. And it's really disappointing to watch. But again, biblically in end times, we know that this is to happen.
You're an educator. The religious exemption, the religious issue often comes in, and a lot of it may have to do with how do you define undue hardship, and who's going to define that?
One of the reasons that I'm a former educator is for this very reason, because of what Kendall said. Because Christians are, when it comes to inclusivity and all of those agendas, it's everybody's included except for Christians. For example, the LGBTQ community, teachers are regularly made to lie to parents about whether or not, what pronouns their students are going by. That is a violation of one's Christian beliefs, having us lie to parents, and that's one of several reasons
so
why I left
just
that
to
environment.
make clear, you had to lie. You're saying you had a child that was identifying as Bobby female instead of Bob male, and you couldn't tell the parents that.
The email that I received very specifically said, call this person this name in the classroom, and when you call home to talk about this person, you use this other name.
Wow.
That is the equivalent of absolutely lying.
Yeah.
And if you said that as a Christian, you would not get back up from your union.
Interesting. Your take on this postal worker. What do you think he should be doing?
Well, the thing is, it comes down to a hardship or an accommodation, and somewhere in the middle, right? And I think when you look at the total staffing, there's one employee that is requesting an accommodation. Given the fact that years later, his work conditions changed because the postal service, in order to survive, must deliver packages on Sunday, right? But I think it's a reasonable accommodation, but people are making it political.
But I'm sorry, John, to interrupt, but I'm just saying, but if you make one accommodation, then I can imagine so many other coworkers being like, well, I'd like to go to church on Sunday, or even if they're not really doing it because of their Christian philosophy and beliefs, but it's like, well, I'd like to have Sunday
Well, if
off.
you're a manager, welcome to management. Now manage. That's what I would have to say. And the only thing about the mail carrier, I would have, if I was his friend, I would have encouraged him not to quit. Let them fire you.
Right, and then,
Exactly.
And so, Thane, what are the unintended consequences in a case like this?
Well, I mean, remember, Title VII is already presuming the rights for religious people, right? That's why it's important to remember Title VII is an anti-discrimination provision, which is saying you can't discriminate against a person that wants to exercise their First Amendment right to freedom of religion. So that's the important thing. This is really about finding the contours of that right. But as Katrina pointed out, one could make the argument, well, why should there be this special exemption for religious people? And we can all come up with other reasons. And that goes to the kernel of what does freedom of religion mean to this country? Is this a Judeo-Christian country? And is this something very specific and unique about religious observance as opposed to other rights that people are looking for? Because remember, in those other cases I talked about, the Supreme Court was choosing religious liberty over other liberties, right? Same-sex marriage. They ruled in favor of religious exercise of liberty over same-sex marriage. So we are seeing a presumption in favor of liberty over other rights.
It looks like, it sounds like these are going to be among the arguments in the opinions that come out when we do get it, I assume sometime in the summer. Kendall Bailey, Kendall in Kentucky, and Professor Thane Rosenbaum, thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right, we're